This week on the Nittany Dispatch, we discuss the transfer portal closing, updates on Beaver Stadium renovations, and what's going on in the college wrestling world that has to do with Penn State. This week on the Nittany Dispatch. Hello and welcome to Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber of the Center Daily Times. She is Audrey Snyder of The Athletic. We haven't recorded in about a month, but things just keep on happening, Audrey.
Have they, John? Because I feel like everything that's been newsy has happened at like 10 p.m. or later, and it's all been like wrestling stuff.
Yes, specifically the wrestling is what I'm talking about, and of course now Beaver Stadium news coming down the pike potentially here soon. It has been a lot. Locations for new,
It's been nice though,
yeah.
John. Don't hype this up. We've had more days off probably than days on.
I don't know if that's true because it seems like for about a week there was wrestling news every single night. Uh,
And the Olympic
between
trials took a toll
Starachi,
on us.
yeah, we had the
hmm
team trials, and then we had Starachi, Kirkfleet, and David Taylor all consecutively. And then you and I were both watching the David Taylor live presser, and that got delayed by a day. So that was an extra day of I did the prep the one day and then had to do the actual work the next day.
And then I got shouted out in the presser. We'll get to that
No, no,
later.
no.
That was a
That
pivot. Yeah,
that was Aubrey Snyder. I think you're thinking
that's
of
true.
someone else.
That was my alter ego.
Yes. But for now, let's start with the Penn State football
Mhm.
news-ish stuff, and some of it is relatively noteworthy. That is the transfer portal closing. Players can no longer enter the portal, whether you're a grad transfer or an undergrad. That is a change that happened recently. I don't know how I feel about that being a rule that changed pretty abruptly for guys that maybe were planning to enter as a grad transfer and now suddenly can't. But that is a decision that came down. Penn State with some notable losses to the portal. I think the biggest one, and I'm sure people who watched the last episode listen to me hint at potential departures right at the end of the episode. This was one of the bigger ones that was coming, and that is King Mack leaving and now committed to Alabama already. You could probably put two and two together on that was his first visit, and he went there. But I think that
I
is
don't
a
understand, John. What are you trying to say?
I'm not saying anything at all. I'm just saying that
What are you trying to say?
that he went in the portal, visited one school, and then committed to that school. Uh, but I think that is
When you know, you
probably
know.
yes the most noteworthy one. King Mack was slated to be the fourth safety this year. Was going to play a lot because they're going to play three safeties a lot.
hmm
No matter how often everyone tells you this isn't a 4-2-5, this is a 4-2-5 defense. And that fifth is a safety linebacker hybrid that is really a safety. Because they want some coverage ability at that spot. And the starter presumably will be Jalen Reed, who is better in coverage than pretty much any linebacker they have on the roster. And I don't think I really have to say pretty much there. He is. And so that this is a loss. This is a loss of someone that was going to play a large number of snaps and could have pushed for a major role this year.
And John, this is what you were hinting at when we did I think it was maybe after the spring game
Yes, that
that
was.
night. And you left the podcast on this very like, and there are going to be some surprises in the portal. And I say this because then I had people reaching out to me on Twitter. And I believe it was early on when Malik Mega was like one of the first or early on entrants. So
Yeah,
like,
I
is
think.
this what John hinted at? And I was like, nope, this is not it. But I think I might have been nice and might have been like, maybe, but no. I mean, you hear things, right? We hear things,
Yes.
we hear names. And this was one name that throughout the spring had kind of come up, and it definitely was a surprise to fans. And again, as reporters, like we're not here to out people before they enter the portal, right? Like that is not
Well,
our
and
job.
and part of it is like
Stuff
guys
changes.
guys change their minds and they're allowed to do that. That's why you will I mean almost never. I can't even think of a circumstance where I wouldn't report that someone's going in the portal unless I have ironclad from that person on the record, right? Like other if you're not getting that, then like guys can change their minds and that is, they're allowed to do that and you can what I mean, you can tweet out that
Yeah.
someone plans to enter and suddenly they don't plan to enter anymore or they decide not to, something happens, whether it's with NIL or roster situation or personal situation, and suddenly you end up looking like the idiot because you put that out there when it
Well,
ended up changing.
and you have in some ways you kind of have the perfect example of that point where Devon Townley Jr. goes in the portal this time, right? The second time, but we saw him withdraw the first time, but this time it was like for real. But real quick, the rundown, I pulled it up so I have it in front of me. But Penn State's portal entrance this spring wave: Keandre Lambert-Smith, Malik McLean, Malik Mega, Carmelo Taylor, Devon Townley, King Mack, and then running back London Montgomery and offensive lineman Golden Israel Achumba. So, John, all in all, like, I consider this a fairly low maintenance, fairly surprise free window. And I guess some of that is because the Lambert Smith stuff was trickling out the week of the blue white game, right? So like it wasn't all at once. It wasn't like, oh man,
Yep.
he's here and he's gone. It's like, no, he wasn't at practice. He wasn't at the spring game. Put two and two together. But yeah, I think you're spot on. King Mack is the surprising one. I've had people ask me, and I have a mailbag coming up on the Athletic this week on a bunch of different topics here. We were like all over the map on stuff, which is kind of what May is.
Yes.
But one of the questions is one that I've seen heard a lot of, and people are saying, well, is there something wrong that all of these receivers, right? Because 4 wide receivers entered the portal this window. Like, is there something wrong? Or people are phrasing it, some have as a mass exodus. And I was like, no, like look at the roster, look at the
That's
roles that these
mischaracterization.
players played. Gross mischaracterization. Like, right, like these guys have not played significant roles with the exception of Keandre Lambert-Smith. I mean, Malik McLean, which he did announce, he's going to Arizona State University, which I don't know, John, this probably wasn't many people's thoughts or their first thought, but my first thought on that was, man, this guy's gone to a lot of states. Florida State, Penn State,
Technically true.
Arizona
Yes.
State. I mean,
Making the
that's
rounds.
making the rounds. Like, I don't, you pick a state, he's going to be there. But I think you look at it, Malik Mega, his role was going to be capped at special teams, right?
Mhm.
Carmelo Taylor, James Franklin had hinted that the size, he was 5'11", 161 pounds, I believe, on Penn State's like spring ball roster. It says a lot about kind of the recruitment and development of the position. And it's been a problem. They're working to change it. But in some ways, it almost feels like you had to kind of process some of these guys out.
Yeah, and you mentioned Carmelo Taylor. He's not someone that even I don't believe he ever actually went in the portal, correct?
Yeah, he
Uh
was
he
removed
just
from the roster.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think just an important distinction.
Yes. No, no, no. I'm glad
Um
you said that.
and he obviously don't expect him to be on Penn State's team this fall. Don't expect him to show back up on the roster this fall. Uh but you mentioned it with Malik Mega. I think to some extent, yes, Malik McLean probably would have played more than Malik Mega on offense. But I also think the role was probably capped there too, right? Like
Mhm.
he is I don't want to call him a finished product. He's not, you know what I mean? He's still a college
Right.
kid. This is not a 30-year-old wide receiver in the NFL, but I think you know what you were going to get this year out of him. And I don't think there was a big enough role uh, for him to be, I would assume, as productive as he likely wanted to be. Right. And so, things happen too, like that they're always trying to think of how to phrase this.
Uh-oh.
There's always more to these portal situations than necessarily playing time or what goes on the field or NIL. You know what I mean? Like there's stuff happens. Um, but yeah, I think McLean will be like, we'll notice that Malik Mega's gone because he really is an elite gunner on special teams. Like
Mhm.
you go back and watch, like he was awesome on special teams. Malik McLean too, same long speed. Like he could have been a deep threat this year, but all in all, I don't know that this impacts the trajectory for the offense or the defense this year. I still think the defense is going to be one of the best in the country. The offense, you just have fewer numbers, I guess, at wide receiver, but I'm not even all that concerned about
Well,
that.
some people were kind of hung up on the numbers. That was me. I was hung up
With
on the
their
scholarship
specific
numbers.
math, to be clear.
Yes, some people get very fixated on numbers here. That's me. Um, but I mean, their total now is more manageable, right? Because they
Yes.
were approaching, by my math, which again I always say is open for interpretation, open for errors. If anyone would like to self-report that they're no longer on a scholarship, my email's there. You can reach out. We can kind of start maybe like a scholarship hotline or something.
It's good.
But
Yeah.
I mean, you're at a more like functioning level now, right? Like
Yeah.
it's more manageable. Um,
One where, let's say, a collective could cover costs. I don't know, just spitballing ideas.
I don't know. I
Uh,
mean, I hear maybe that could be a thing, right?
no one would dare do such a thing or say such a thing. But
Or ask a question about that. That would be the
yeah,
worst.
definitely not getting asked about it. Definitely not getting an answer about it. So
But I do think the King Mack loss long term, that's significant.
Yep.
And I think that's where, and I think it's easy too for fans to say, well, we'll get somebody in the portal and that'll fix our problems, in the future when they arise, whatever. Penn State is never going to be a portal heavy team. This is not going to be like Ole Miss, right? They're not just going to do it and try to keep plugging guys. But I do think, and this is something else I've seen a lot about. People say, well, how in the world did Penn State not get another wide receiver this portal window? And my response to that is, who did you want? Because the argument's there to be made that Keandre Lambert Smith was the best receiver in the portal this window, and he just left.
That's why they
So
didn't want him to leave.
yeah, so I mean, it's like literally like that was your best, like that might have been your best option because again, what we've seen now with a larger sample size of the transfer portal is that more of the marquee players typically are entering after the season ends. So that December, January wave is where you really have to kind of be ready to go because you want guys that are going to be here through spring ball. So yeah, your receiving core is what it is, which again, you could probably find a clip of me saying the same exact thing last year is what it is. Could be problematic this year, but you have to bank on the idea that Julian Fleming and Harrison Wallace III are one, going to stay healthy for the entire year, and two, are both going to have the best years of their career. So you're asking for a lot here, but it's also realistic.
Yeah, I think it's kind of reasonable for
Mhm.
both of those things to happen. Uh, Injuries can be fluky at times, as we know, especially in a sport like football. But the other thing that you kind of have to bank on if you're a Penn State fan is that to call a spade is that Mike Yurcich was the problem, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that Andy Kotelnicki is the solution.
Coach K.
Yeah, I'm just not. I listen. I understand. There's no like uh, up on my high horse with this. I just don't like the nicknames, so I don't want to use it. Like he hasn't asked me to call him Coach K. If he does, I'll call him that. But like, I'm not going to call him Coach K. I'm big proponent of if you want me to call you something, I'll call you. Call you what
Mhm.
you please. Uh,
Or just
and
call me Aubrey, and
yeah, yeah, but it's different with you, Audra. Like I'm willing to
yeah.
more uh play fast and loose with the nicknames on this end. But yeah, this is you're right though. This like King Mack is a loss, and at the end of the day, the offense is probably not affected by anything that they lost as much as the defense is by losing Mack. But like I said, I still think the defense is going to be elite this year. Not overly concerned about it. I think in 2 years, maybe you look back and think, oh man, what if they had King Mack? But there's also time for the coaching staff to go to the portal and find someone like they did with the Davian Collins last year corner, find a safety that can kind of backfill and grow into that what they envisioned for King Mack. So
I mean,
this isn't like a lost cause or anything. And to be clear though,
no.
they may not be Ole Miss. They're also not Clemson. So it could be worse.
Shots fired at Dabo. Yeah, they're not going to be portal negligent.
Yes.
Um, and I think perhaps now kind of one of the more intriguing players on this roster, I think, becomes Dakari Nelson. Right, like
Yep.
you kind of have to think about his development because ultimately this was a 3 safety class with Mack, Nelson, and Lamont Payne Jr. So you have that, but where I think this could get even more interesting, again, kind of forecasting out after this year, right? Jalen Reed, KJ Winston has a good year. If Saki Wheatley has a good year, all of a sudden, then you're maybe are looking at losing all three of those guys.
I
Um,
honestly, I think reasonably you're looking at losing two of them.
Two. I'm
Uh,
with you.
I think KJ Winston has a chance to be the first safety off the board in next year's class. We'll get into these guys more when we start to preview the season, but I am very high on KJ Winston. Have been for a while.
And I guess this is like the part of the show where we mention that this year, because we're already seeing it with the draft behind us, we know Penn State probably is going to have a lot of guys drafted next year. But Drew Aller, is he what people think he is? Is he not? Like we are already like it's starting. All of the hype, the build up, the questions. I already went to Dan Brugler, our NFL draft guru at the Athletic. I was exchanging Slack messages with Dane earlier this week about Drew already, and just kind of what are your thoughts on him, and what questions do you have? And yeah, it's gonna be an interesting season from that perspective too.
Yeah. I'm not even dipping my toes in that discussion because I did a 10 Nittany lines that I think can get drafted early
Hmm.
next year. And I mean, Drew has to be at the top of the list because if he hits, let me say that again. If If he hits, he has a chance to go number one overall. Massive if.
Top 10.
But
Top 10.
it's the position. You know what I mean? Like, right? He's a quarterback. Like, there's a world where he is, and admittedly, it's a weaker quarterback class too. So you might see guys artificially get pushed up the board. That tends to happen, as long as teams view them as starters, which we've seen in the past hasn't always been the case, like with the Kenny Pickett class. But
Mhm.
uh, I digress. I feel like we have covered the portal plenty here, and
The portal is
hopefully,
closed, and we are done
yes,
talking about it.
until December when we have to discuss it for weeks on end again.
Yeah.
But there is more happening with Penn State. Tuesday there is a I don't even know what to say. Like, there's something happening
You know
with
what,
the board of
John?
trustees in Beaver Stadium.
Here's all we really, really need to know about
Yes,
this.
let's lay this out
So
as simply and unconfusingly as possible, which means
this.
that's probably a paradox and not possible. So
Well, no, it's as simple as this. I am going away for the next 2 weeks. I will
that's
be in
true.
the Caribbean starting Tuesday. So Penn State will hold a vote on Tuesday to vote on the Beaver Stadium renovations. So that's really all you need to know.
Yes.
Is that, I mean, I don't know. We saw a facility master plan in 2017. So really, between 2017 and now, at any point, this could have happened. So
Yes.
we wait till I
Although
am out of pretty much on the fringe out of the country, as far off on a rock as I can get. Um, and they will vote on the stadium.
are we are we sure that the 2017 plan is even a
No, okay.
thing? Like,
So
this is the
yeah,
problem.
yeah.
This like
This
I
is why
hate
we
to
drink.
be
This
yes.
is why right here.
I
Um,
hate to be dismissive on some level, but we really don't know. Let me rephrase. We can't really say with 100% certainty what Tuesday's going to look like, what the plan is, what
oh,
the
I can tell you what it's gonna look like, John.
oh yeah, well, there's a
Me
lot
on
of
a beach, yeah, with
well,
drinking
for
something.
me, in my house trying to work, I cannot tell you what it's going to look like. Um, Probably a disaster for me if I had to guess, but it's one of those things where there's not a lot of clarity, and by not a lot of clarity, I mean there is no clarity on anything right now. Um,
So here's
that
yeah,
may change between now and Tuesday, but yeah, this is a mess.
Tuesday afternoon, so we're talking Tuesday, May 21st. The Penn State Board of Trustees, they will gather to discuss, and I pulled up the agenda so I don't butcher any of the words. The
Gather
topic,
digitally.
sure, gather digitally, and I'll tune in from an island. The proposed project approval, Beaver Stadium renovation, right? So remember it was last May, Penn State Athletics went before the board and basically said, I'm like really simplifying this, hey, we'd like 70 million. And with that 70 million, we'll use it for design costs, stadium maintenance. There's been a backlog of more than $200 million of Beaver Stadium maintenance. Um, so again, which is baffling when you think about that. But they went to the board last May and said, "Hey, like we really would like this money because this is the next step before we can decide about this renovation, what it's going to look like. We need to kind of explore all these different avenues of what could we do, what's feasible, what are the costs, all these types of things." So that was last May. Now, where I think some of this confusion might be coming from with the stadium renovation, well, a couple things. One, that it's taken so long to get to this point,
It's
right?
never just one thing.
Never one thing. So, if we go back to 2017, Sandy Barber had the facility master plan. That image came out of what Beaver Stadium could potentially look like with the brick exterior, all this stuff. Um, that that was the 20-year roadmap, right? The whole master plan was for 20 years. Beaver Stadium, they said beyond the first 5 years, they'd get to that. They'd start kind of discussing it more. Well, then nothing happened. Nothing happened. They kept doing kind of thinking about it, figuring out what they wanted to do. Do you renovate? Do you rebuild?
Doing nothing.
Doing some things. But ultimately, then you have the leadership change. Pat Kraft gets in here, which is now approaching 2 years. And it's like, okay, this stadium, like something needs to happen. Again, $200 million worth of backlogged maintenance. This all kind of gets pushed a little bit more forward because of the college football playoff and the fact that Penn State, like everyone else, could potentially host a playoff game this year, 2024, in December. Well, there are problems with Beaver Stadium, again, part of the backlog maintenance, with winterization. And in order to host a game when the temperatures probably are going to dip below freezing, unless, I mean, maybe if you're just not banking on it or you're just, depending on your thoughts on global warming, maybe you just think it's going to be a nice day. But regardless of the ice caps and polar bears, there are certain things that need to be done for a stadium so they could kind of play longer into the season. So that was what part of that 70 million was for. Penn State then goes, they do the maintenance. So my understanding is right now Penn State is fine to host a playoff game in Beaver Stadium in December. So that's good. Like immediately that's good. However, what do you do with this stadium long term? And that is what this coming Tuesday is about. That's the formal vote on the $700 million proposed renovation. Now,
70
within
million of which was already approved.
70, that was for permits, design, the winter maintenance so they could host a playoff game, that type of stuff.
Yes.
So very like scintillating stuff when fans are like, well, we haven't seen an image. And you haven't. Like, I think that's the other thing I want to put out there.
Yes.
I have not seen a design of the stadium, right? We all saw
Right.
that 2017, but that was different, right? Like that was different than where we are now.
It feels safe to say that plan for Beaver Stadium isn't really being considered with regard to, maybe bits and pieces of it are
Mhm.
taken from it and it's what's going to happen. But I think it's safe to say that 20-year plan for Beaver Stadium is kind of not really relevant anymore. And what part of the problem I think is what you're getting at here too. I haven't seen an image of it. You haven't seen an image. We haven't seen renderings. The public hasn't seen any of this stuff. Nobody has publicly because they haven't released anything since 2017. And so when you kind of look this stuff up, when you're trying to find it, what you find is a 2017 plan that isn't really relevant anymore. And so I think it's causing a lot of
Right.
confusion for people about what Tuesday is, what's getting approved, what it's going to look like. And I just, like you said, it's very, very important to say that in all likelihood, if you were listening to this or watching us on YouTube, by the way, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. If you're listening there, hit the subscribe button down below on YouTube. That always helps us out. We are approaching, I believe, 1,000 followers on YouTube or subscribers. We really appreciate that.
It's a nice round number.
It is. I would love to get to it. If the listener
That'd
and
be great.
watchers can help us out, that would be delightful. But if you are watching or listening, you probably haven't seen it either. And don't worry. That is the spot that everyone else is into, right? Do not feel like you're missing something here. That is, I think that's part of the reason for this confusion is that the most recently publicly released thing just kind of doesn't matter.
And I think the other part of this, also like how sexy is it for a school to release an image of like heat trace and like here's a widened concourse, right? Like that's not what fans want to see, right? Fans want to see
Look at
what
the
is
new
this
plumbing in the
stadium going to look
stadium.
like? Yeah, like oh, here's a new bathroom. Like no, that's not what people want to see. But that is so far, like you go back, you look at everything that's come out of the last 2 years. That's what this renovation thus far has kind of been described as. It's about helping move the flow of crowds through the stadium. It's about improving amenities like the bathrooms, right? What are you going to do? Take a photo of someone trying to get Wi Fi in the stadium and say, wow, here it is. We're going to make this better. I
You and
mean,
I can
that's
send
part
me in
of
there
this.
on a game day to do that. I can just
Yeah,
wander
I'll do
around,
that for free.
hold
Yeah.
my phone up, and
I mean, it's kind of so. I think some of it too with the design piece is you have these other elements, right? Like, how do you show backlogged maintenance and get people excited and want to give, right? So I think it's some of that. Now, what has been out there focuses on the stadium's west side, which is the press box side. What was announced at some point in the last year, it all kind of runs together at this point, might have been last May, was that the plan is the structure, that's the press box, right? Like that's that side. You're going to keep the bowl around it and you're going to put club, loge, and executive suites there, right? So that replaces our structure. You keep the bowl below that. I know there have been fan concerns about what does that mean for those seats, right? Because tentatively, what's been announced before is that the timeline is this would start immediately after this season. So January of 2025, they would start kind of shoveling ground, so to speak, on that west side. So people are saying, well, am I going to have my seats for 2025? Am I going to have my seats for 2026? One of the things that came out in the last 2 years that said there could be a small number of people that would be impacted. So all of that we do not know. Like we are just like the public and everyone else in terms of not having seen a lot of these things. So Tuesday, hopefully there are more details. Hopefully it's more than just a yes or no vote. Um, but again, some of these things I also don't know how do you show them, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's part of it too. Is it's not as cosmetic as I think people may have envisioned.
mhm.
Um, but
Because we saw that 2017 image and everybody, with
yes,
the brick exterior, people go to that, and that's totally more than fair. I get it.
and to be clear though, once we get to Tuesday, don't forget to check the Athletic, check the Center Daily Times. We will, Audrey and I will have you covered. Both of us will on those fronts, as to what we know as we find out. Like we'll both be writing about this. I am sure of it, even if you were on vacation. It's
Oh
just
yeah, it's already yeah, can't wait.
nature of the beast. But I think that's good for Beaver Stadium. I think we've kind of
Oh, I know. I wanted to add one more thing, John, on that.
okay.
One more because it just popped in my mind. We did see since we've last recorded, they had the Luke Combs concert in the stadium,
Yes,
and I do think we can classify that as a successful event. 80,000 plus people in terms of tickets sold. It was. I know there were a lot of traffic issues. I've
I was
heard
gonna say
horror stories. I've heard that. But all valid concerns and complaints. Some of that is just kind of the fact of it's basically like the night game scenario here, right? Where everybody's leaving at the same time. What do you do? So I
and
think
their
some of
usual
that.
like traffic patterns and everything aren't in effect because it's a crowd of people that isn't usually attending football games, not used to this stuff. And there's all sorts of factors at play there.
Yeah, yeah, no. So I mean, there's that, but I do think it's a really good example of Penn State had a lot of stuff working against it for this event in terms of the weather was really terrible. It was rainy. It was cold. It was the same weekend as the NFL draft, which probably didn't impact many people, but some would prefer to watch that. I think maybe, but still got a massive turnout. They also had, I think, like softball, lacrosse. There was a lot going on, which again does not help with parking and traffic. So that's something else to kind of look at moving forward. But as a first concert in the stadium since the Happy Valley Jam in 2016 or 17, 18, whatever it was,
2017, I think.
um, I think this is a significant and this is an important first step. I have a story up on the Athletic about that and kind of some of the other ideas that Penn State has, and some of the ideas I think they maybe should try to implement moving forward in terms of using the stadium more than a handful of times a year to generate revenue. Carter Starachi kind of volunteered one idea himself when he tweeted about what about wrestling, right, in Beaver Stadium. We've seen it happen before. Iowa did it. I
Rutgers
want to
did it,
say
I think.
Rutgers. I was gonna say I think Rutgers did as well. I know for sure Iowa had like 42,000 plus people. So
I will
again, maybe
say
this is something you do.
that is an excellent transition on your part into us discussing some wrestling here.
Hmm.
Uh, this has been a we haven't dipped our toes into the wrestling water on this podcast yet, but both of us cover it
We're in
kind of.
head first now. Yeah.
Yeah, like in have like we were both at Olympic team trials for what felt like 3 weeks without being able to leave the Bryce Jordan Center. Uh, but there has been a lot that has happened. As I mentioned earlier, Carter Starachi and Greg Kirkfleet both announced they're coming back. That's massive news for Penn State as they, I don't even want to say like chase a national title as they try to re-break their own points record in all likelihood. I think that is more likely. But the biggest news is that David Taylor is no longer part of the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, is now the Oklahoma State head coach in a move that is going to I think I don't know that you can undersell the potential impact of this long
Right.
term. Will he be that level of coach that can have this enormous impact? Remains to be seen. But there is the upside here for him to be a Kale Sanderson level hire, and I think it's a little dismissive to say that that upside doesn't exist. Now, is it 80 percentile outcome that it happens, or is it like 60th percentile, or is it 100th? Right? Like, what is the likelihood? I don't know, but I feel confident saying that it is a legitimate possibility that David Taylor gets this Oklahoma State wrestling program back to being, one of the most prestigious in the country. It's always been one of the most prestigious,
Hmm.
but competitively, I could very easily see it within a year or two being clear cut number 2 in the country, and then 2 years after that, who knows how high the ceiling is.
I think back to kind of the way it was described, and I did a big story on Kale Sanderson 2 winters ago. And the way it was described to me, I'm thinking kind of because it's parallel track here. of this is a sleeping giant, right? You have the
Mhm.
want to win, you have the resources, you have the financial backing. And that's what Penn State was, and that's certainly what Oklahoma State is as well. And I think what's interesting or most interesting to me is trying, and I'm still working on it, and I've got some FOIA requests out there, and hopefully Oklahoma State would
Oh,
like to
don't we
fulfill
all?
those. Yeah, if you'd like to get back to my open records requests, they are there
Well,
awaiting
you
your
know what?
response.
Get back to mine first and then get to Audrey's.
Yeah, they're probably like, "Audrey, this who's this
They're like,
person
"We
contacting
know
us?"
an Aubrey Snyder. I don't know an Audrey Snyder."
Yeah, it's so to me, it's like how did this kind of unfold, right? And some of this people will never tell you on the record, meaning things that we can report of how this happened. But I think it all goes back to that night at the Olympic trials. Aaron Brooks, David Taylor, they're the moment on the mat. That was, as David then said, in his introductory news conference, that he had decided pretty much going into 2024 that kind of whatever the outcome was, his career competitively as a wrestler was going to be finished. So we didn't know it then because the shoes
Yep.
weren't on the mat. But you and I'll tell listeners this right now. You and I had a couple conversations that day after the first match going into that night where we
Yes.
both were like, "Ooh, we might need to pre-write a
I
like."
was gonna say we talked about pre-writing quite a bit on this show. That was definitely an afternoon before the final session where you and I did some pre-writing, just in
Mhm.
case because uh, I like to say this a lot. Call it an educated guess that it might have been the end. Didn't know how it was going to happen, obviously,
Yeah.
but call it an educated guess that the end could have been coming had that result been played out exactly how it did. But yeah, to me, that's what got the ball rolling. Right, that is where everything started going in the direction of David Taylor heading to Stillwater. You're right. Like this is where it's tough to have this discussion because there's only so much you can say
Mhm.
that you've been told that you can say with high degree of confidence. I feel like I'm not going to ruffle any feathers here that it wasn't the cleanest split. Right, like I think that it could have gone smoother. I'll say it that way. With David Taylor leaving the Nittany Line Wrestling Club and kind of the what he's built in Center County.
And I think there is, and again, going back to the story I wrote on The Athletic about Kel Sanderson a couple years ago, that story, I mean, that took basically about 10 years for people being willing to talk about how
Right,
he actually left Iowa State, right? Like, it's,
2034 got it circled on the calendar.
yeah, we'll be looping back to that, 2034. Uh, like, because it is delicate. And if you're David, right, like, obviously there's the relationship with Kale, which is significant. There's that piece to it. There's the relationship with M2 and the athletes there. There's the relationship within the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, right? There's the relationship with, hey, Jimmy Kennedy, Thomas Gilman, you're coming with me, right? Like, does that sound good? Are we going to do this? Sure. So you have all these changes, and you have, I think, and we hear it so much with football too, with any sport, you always try to be as delicate as you can and you don't want to hurt people's feelings, you don't want to ruffle any feathers, but I think some of it just is unavoidable, right?
Yes.
It's just kind of the nature of the business. It is what it is. Um,
You go from being a legend at one place to a direct competitor and a threat,
mhm.
frankly, right? Like
Oh
Oklahoma, the
yeah.
goal for David Taylor is to not just be a threat to Penn State, but to overtake Penn State, right? Like it can be a nasty business, but I think you're right. The cleanest escape or the cleanest exit, escape's a bad way to phrase
I
that.
was just saying, are
Uh,
you trying to go for all the wrestling terms today?
yeah, the cleanest exit is uh messy, right? Just because of the nature of the beast and how these things go. Um, it's not like, you know, even Brent Pry leaving for Virginia Tech or something like that, right? Where Penn State doesn't have to worry about Virginia Tech. You know what I mean? Like maybe there's like 2 or 3 recruits a
Well,
year
great. Now
that's
we're gonna have Virginia Tech people pissed off at this podcast. Great, John.
go ahead. By all means. Gather in the comment section, be my guest. Just don't forget to hit the subscribe button while you're here. But no, I think like no matter what, it's going to be, you know what I mean? It's going to be uh, somewhat unfavorable for everyone involved. And I, I feel confident saying that's what happened here. And everyone is going to move forward now with David Taylor being, probably the greatest threat that Cale Sanderson's seen to what he's built. Will that happen in 2 years? Probably not. but like I said, in 5 years, 4 years, like I think it's possible that there is. I guess the bar is rather high, but like maybe they're competing with Penn State, right, for a national title. Maybe it's not Penn State just seeking to break their own
Or
record
yeah, or maybe you
consistently, or
see it play out in certain weight classes, right? Like maybe
right.
you have some of those types of
Oh, that
competitions.
I think that will happen much quicker than 4 years,
Mm.
right? Like I wouldn't be surprised if within like a year or two that there's someone from Oklahoma State that wouldn't have otherwise been there without David Taylor that is competing with someone at Penn State for a title, for third place, for whatever at NCAA's.
And I think too, to me, it's like you look at it and you say, okay, well, David's seen the blueprint, right? I mean, few people know Cale Sanderson better than David Taylor, right? And spending all the time together, dating
Followed
back
him
to
from Iowa
his
State to
recruitment. I
Penn
mean, he's
State.
yeah, known him long before that too. Like he's seen the blueprint. Can it be duplicated? And that to me is like I don't know. I mean, is there some because you can at least say with Kale where you say, okay, well, he had the coaching experience at Iowa State where David didn't have that, but David in a different way has seen it from kind of the club scene and going about it that way with them too. And so I'm gonna be fascinated by the whole thing. Just because I again we don't know how this is gonna play out, but I think it's good for college wrestling.
Yes.
Because to me it's like we've seen Penn State just destroy people year after year after year, and they're probably going to continue to do that.
I
But
will say it did make pre-writing nice during NCAAs when I just knew there were a couple
oh
stories
yeah,
I could take care of in November if I wanted to,
yeah, I
and
was at
again, we'll be able to this year in all
oh
likelihood.
yeah, I was at March Madness, and I was like, well, the story's already filed, so
Yeah.
here we are. Yeah, so that was kind of it's been, but I think too, like that success is so crazy and it's staggering, and then we're gonna see it too on the Olympic stage. That's
Mhm.
the other part of this is over the weekend, Zane Rutherford along with Spencer Lee of Iowa qualified the weight, which is huge, right? So Zane Rutherford
All
is
6
now
freestyle men's
officially
wrestlers. Yeah.
mhm, yep, all 6 freestyle wrestlers qualified. 4 of the 6 have a tie to here, which is really interesting. But I still think too, like the Zane Rutherford story that he told us at the trials in January, he was considering walking away and taking a full-time job in New
Yep.
York City, gives it
And his
another go.
boss's
And here he is.
flexibility was what allowed him to do this,
Yeah,
right?
right? Like super which is why I love the Olympic sports for
Mhm.
stories like that, and like, it's just so different, than anything else, which honestly, that's why it's been fun for me just kinda diving into some more wrestling and writing about it
No, me
because it
too.
is different. I did
Yeah.
not grow up watching it, I didn't grow up a fan of it. The wrestling I watched as a kid was then the WWF, so again,
Listen,
irrelevant.
I watched that too, but I did grow up watching wrestling, so this is less of a new thing for me at the
Yeah,
very least, but
it's different, but yeah,
yeah.
so we'll talk about wrestling stuff on here on occasion because especially this time of year, with a move that big. Um, but
And
John,
a
anything
relative
else
downtime.
we downtime as they
Yeah.
say, as the stadium renovation vote inches
Yes, I
closer.
said relative. I said relative. But no, I think that pretty much covers it. We covered a lot today. We will be back at some point again. Audrey, like she said, is going on vacation and should stay off of her phone and laptop, but it won't
We hope.
because none of us ever do when we go on such vacations. It's just the nature of the beast. But if you'd like to follow Audrey on Twitter, you can find her at OddSnyder4. You can find her writing at The Athletic. You can find me on Twitter at John Sauber. You can find my writing at centerdaily.com. That's CENTRE, like the county, not the noun. Noun? Noun? Is it now? I don't even know my parts of speech anymore.
We're gonna need like the Schoolhouse Rock. We're just gonna have
Yes.
the songs play.
Somebody tell me what that word is. But I think that's a good place to leave it. Until next time, thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.